So I want to start off by sharing you an email strand that, or not email, but a Facebook strand that happened, and get your feedback and help. So a friend of mine, Alan, put up this thing about how Facebook is full of it because he put something up there that was false, and so they took it down. And so that was not the point. It was what Hanoi Jane Fonda did and said. All right.
When did she say this?
Back 50 years ago or whatever. So I answered him that way, and I said, so why is it so important to you, Alan, what happened 50 years ago?
Right.
Right? He basically said, please stick all your, I don't think he said please, I think he said stick all your liberal crap. So,
Oh my
so I said, no, I really want to know, why is that important to you? And then a friend of mine, and this is where I want you guys to chime in. My friend Mark wrote back, and he said, and BLM, Black Lives Matter, is upset about an issue that was addressed first 150 years ago, and then again 50 years ago, but that's not a double standard, I suppose. The same divining rod goes both ways, my friend. I, for one, am appalled by the posts of kind and gentle people, or so, kind and gentle was a thing that I used, or so I thought they were. The contempt that has been shown by liberals on Facebook and other forms of social media is at the same time surreal, alarming, and disturbing. To protest is one thing, to completely dump on your countrymen for not sharing a belief system is appalling. There is no defense for this behavior. It's not about what is right. It is about being angry for the sake of being angry. So ask yourself, Jem, what is the point of prolonged protests, complete disregard of the government, stepping on the flag that provides your freedom, and by the way, your right to have an opinion that defies objectivity and logic? I thought that was very indicative of exactly what she was talking about in this whole section. We weren't even addressing Black Lives Matter. It was a whole different other issue, and he steps in very strongly, reacting to this moment. What advice do you give me? How do I talk to him? What do I do?
Why do you want to talk to him?
Yeah.
Because he's a very dear friend of mine.
Oh, okay. That's different.
But the reason I ask that is because all of us have people like that in our life that are going to react very strongly when you try to push and say something along these lines. That are going to say something about, well, like this.
They live inside an echo chamber.
Yes.
Fox News, Breitbart, and, you know, their own, I mean, it's like I have one person that I'm on Facebook with who's an evangelical. And we haven't seen each other in at least 10 years, but we still do, we're still Facebook friends. And she put a post yesterday from it that she said, well, all these doctors came on Fox News, said that this whole coronavirus thing is not all that bad. People get it. 99.9% of people are getting over it, and they should all take this, whatever that stuff is.
Oh, that's a Herman Cain.
Yeah, thank you. My tongue won't wrap around that quite. And it was like, she was like, so why isn't the media picking up on it? Why aren't they, and I haven't responded to her because I want to go, please, at least don't be, this is dangerous stuff you're putting forth. And it's really, really, I mean, if she believes all this and spreading it, but it's inside this echo chamber of that's all they get.
Yes. And yet it is inside of that echo chamber that we must relate to these friends of ours?
I'm
Right?
not sure.
Well, why do you have to have discussions about things in which you have such controversy or opposition? In other words, if it's creating more difficulty, strife, anxiety, problems, why have conversations about that, Jim? You can't persuade. The way I see it is, I can't persuade somebody else to come to my place. All I can do is live my life in a loving way. So if I have a friend that I don't agree with politically, I can talk about a million other things. We don't have to talk about those things in which we don't agree, because it's just going to bring discomfort and pain and upset that relationship. And the relationship is far more important than being right about a political issue or anything else.
Right. I don't disagree with you at all, Elizabeth, except that the reason why 150 years ago we dealt with this, and 50 years ago we dealt with this, and again we need to deal with it again today is why?
Silence.
Because it was silenced and it never got truly taken care of.
Right.
And so you can't just silence. I get that is an option to use, but as a nation we can't just silence it. It doesn't just go away by silence. And so you have to do something that somehow helps us to directly deal with it. And that's challenging. You get into spaces like this.
So what do you intend to do?
I guess I would want to be really empathetic and understanding his point of view, let him know that I understand his point of view before I state my own.
So let me go to another side of things, of that same conversation. I told you about the man who started it. His name is Alan.
Alan. Mm-hmm.
And at one point during the conversation, Alan put just the word man ?
What was it? He put what?
Man, M-A-N, man,
Right. ?
I didn't understand that. So I said, please tell me what you're talking about. Can you help me? And Alan replied back, you said Jane Fonda was a he. And I go, I did. So I looked back at my conversation and this is what I said. Liberal or not, why is this statement about Jane Fonda important to you? I truly don't understand a 50-year animosity from a man who I have always seen as gentle and kind.
Mm.
Oh,
He took that man, meaning that I was talking about Jane Fonda.
Yeah, you were talking about him.
I wouldn't say she's gentle and kind, but
I said,
cool.
sorry. So I said, no, I said, you were a gentle and kind man. And Alan replied back, sorry, I thought you said she was. Nope, I said, I respect you. I don't know her. And so I think sometimes, like with Alan, he takes it to the worst possible space, and we have to return back to the relational space.
I think it's a good demonstration of why texting and emails, unless they're really full, are so difficult, because there are gaps.
Yeah, or any conversation, we easily get
Yeah.
sidetracked, diverted from something. Especially if I'm trying to very strongly hold on to my truth and it blinds me in whatever way, or they are, either way. Because that's what I believe Mark was doing as well, was letting his a truth get in the way of him being in conversation.
Well, Jim, this is Dixie.
Yes.
You see me twice because I can see everybody on my computer, but the sound doesn't work. So I'm
Oh,
not
yeah. Oh, you're over here.
yeah. But my sound works on my phone. I had this situation with a dear friend. There's 5 of us that have been getting together over 40 years for a long weekend, for girls' weekend. And it blew up really bad. The last time Black Lives Matter came up and Ferguson, and we literally didn't talk for months. And it was awful. And anyway, I finally eventually approached her, and we talked, and I just said, we've been friends too long. We got to get over this. And we did. We talked, not about politics, but later she actually apologized for some of the behaviors and things that people had said about Obama, which was really progress. Now I'm sitting here in this space thinking with this conversation, Jim, that the horrible things that I probably have posted and said on Facebook, that I'm in that spot. And she was willing, and I'm going to have to find myself in a place where I can maybe apologize to her. Right now, we just don't talk about that. And there's a lot of things going on in her life, and she isn't concentrating on politics. But it's really hard. I mean, it's just, I guess, I value her relationship, and that would be what I tell her, is that your relationship's more important than this. And when we can talk about it, we can, and when we can't, we just can't. And but it wasn't worth it to lose her friendship. I've known her for too many years, and we'll never agree. I laughed the last time I talked to her. She was talking about open carrying and going to a protest, and I just said, well, I hope we don't meet on opposite sides of a protest. But there's some truth to it. But I love her dearly, but we'll never agree. Never.
But I think the bottom line with some of this that happens is that we've turned each other into enemies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is not what we want to have happen.
No.
Right? But we can't go back to the wrong relationship as a whole, right? When she talked about habitus, I think that was a really good discussion and a very pertinent thing about Pierre Bourdieu's idea of habitus. Just because it's somebody's habit and they will fight to defend that habit doesn't mean that it's right for us to let them stay in that space. Mm-hmm. Somehow we have to be in the conversation about the other two elements, the field and capital, that allow them to be able to see that habitus is not helpful. But you don't do that by ignoring it, because when it just gets ignored, it becomes more insidious, and all of a sudden 50 years later pops up again in particularly deadly ways. Okay? We didn't solve black-white issues. We hid from it for a time. We've got to be bold enough to be in there without hurting the relationship. We've got to be clear that what we do in the midst of all this is we've got to say, I'm with you, but you've got to listen to me as well.
Well, I'm guilty so often of hearing what I expect to hear.
Yeah, but that's what habitus is about.
It doesn't really matter what the other person has said. I hear what I've expected them to say.
Judy, can you speak more into your microphone?
I can try.
Oh, that's much better.
Thank you.
I said I'm often guilty of hearing what I expect to hear, not necessarily what the person is saying.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's a difference between trying to persuade someone to believe what I believe than making sure that they know what I believe.
Yeah.
That's where my courage sometimes fails, is that I stay quiet rather than say, I don't believe the way you do. And I still love you, but I don't believe that.
Yeah.
It's hard.
And much of it comes down to what was essentially her first line of the second chapter we read, where it said, white people feel attacked by.
Yeah.
And how is it that in our conversation that we already have stepped into a space of attack? Not because we meant to all the time, although, okay, so like with my conversation with Alan, talking about Jane Fonda, I really wasn't attacking, but I wasn't not attacking. If that makes sense, right? And so he definitely took it from the attacking side and said, get your liberal stuff out of here. So how do we step into those conversations without triggering that? but honest conversations, because you can just avoid them, right?
Mhm.
Make it all the happier.
Well, I guess it depends upon what the purpose of having the conversation is. I mean, I think that expressing what I believe is very important, and I do that. But trying to persuade someone else, I'm going to put it out there. This is where I am, and you can take it or leave it. And I need to not be hooked by whether or not you take it or leave it,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
and not impale myself onto your hook because you don't like what I think or feel. I can impale myself on that hook and get angry with you, but I'm trying hard to refuse to do that because that's not good for me and my serenity.
But Elizabeth, what do we do when what is being spoken is not true? For example, her discussion about affirmative action, right?
Right.
And what affirmative action is and isn't is very different than what sometimes my friends will say affirmative action is or is not doing, right? So how do you correct an untrue perception or a downright lie just because they believe it?
I express that's not my understanding about affirmative action. What I understand is, and whatever that is, and say it and let it go.
Yeah.
So they at least have heard it and they can consider it. And other than that, I can't do anything. I mean, I'm powerless. I got to see where my power is and where my power isn't. And that's the only way I can stay somewhat serene going through all this stuff.
Thank you.
It's like I say in AA, it's like, help me to know what my power is and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. That's why I don't get hooked into Facebook discussions.
Yeah.
At all. Other than really loving, wonderful things.
Granddaughter and her red hair,
Yeah.
What?
like Lily and her red hair.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Like Lily and her red hair.
How about the
My
rest?
granddaughter changed her hair color.
I really try to bring it onto a very personal level. And of course, yeah, as you all know, having a friend of color who I was really close to, I will say things, along the lines of what I saw in his life, what his life was like, and his mother's life was like, and the realities that
Right.
they had to live, given the circumstances. And then, let my friend of, a very different, who has a very different ideas about the world than I do, let them know how much it just, it broke my heart to see their struggle, to see that his mother had to have 2 jobs, and he was a latchkey kid, and, he didn't have the opportunities to go to college, and, so on. Just really explaining how it felt for me to watch that. And because that's something they can't argue with. You can be as right wing as you want, but when your friend is saying how much it meant to her that this person was in her life, and this is a person of color, and how their life was affected because of being in a white supremacist country, you can't argue with that.
But they will try. They will try. And I've been in this kind of a situation with family where I made, it's been a couple of years, well, it's been when Trump was first running. And I made a comment to a very, very conservative Christian we have a large family of that. And I made a comment on Facebook about something that she had said, and I was attacked by her husband, and my choice was like Liz's. You're not going to change their mind. You are not going to make it better that way. So I just abruptly stopped the conversation. I did not respond. He won, and I mean that's what he needed. He needed to win, and I did not need to. I did not need to deal with that kind of stress between me and a member of the family, and who I have tried in the past to support in a very loving way. So that I just found what she said to be so offensive and so really not right at all.
Yeah.
That I felt like I needed to tell her that I did not agree. But then, man, he really came back at me like, I mean, he was defending his wife, and so I mean, what am I supposed to do then? So we have found in this situation, in this part of the family, that it's best for us to not, because the feelings are just so ingrained, and they are absolutely not, they're not going to listen to you at all. So at that point, what do? They know that we don't agree, but what good does it do to bring it up at all anymore?
I think you're right that is one of the challenging places, Marty, is that there is a lot of, I'm not going to change no matter what you say. I'm going to win this conversation. I'm going to. So what do?
We move on to the next conversation, but that one is not going anywhere. So, so somebody else, I have another friend, a very dear friend, and we disagree on a lot of things. One of them was recently we were driving together. I was driving and she was a passenger. And a guy on a motorcycle cut in front of us, and it could have been a bad accident. And she, I said, wow. And she said, I bet you would have liked to have at least said a bad word to him. Most people don't think I say bad words, but I do. And so anyway, we got to talking about guns. And she said, if I'd had a gun, she said, I probably would have pulled it on him. And I said, yeah. I said, that's probably a good idea. Because he probably has one too. And said, you have guns? And I said, yes, we do. And she looked at me and she said, you have guns? And I said, you do. And, I mean, there's a point, but we're so different on so many things. But this was an area where I said, I don't have a handgun, but we have several rifles. And I said, and I love to shoot shotguns. I've shot trap, and it's one of the most favorite things I've ever done. And she was absolutely appalled, like, I didn't know this about you. It's okay on some levels. It's okay to do this, to reveal something that people make assumptions about you. But there are some areas that it's best not to talk about.
That didn't fit your stereotype, Marty.
Oh, I know it doesn't.
I know. I was so surprised when you said that.
Before, in other areas where we've, other instances where people have been up and like, whoa, Marty, we didn't know you knew those words. Or, oh, Marty, we didn't know you ever did that. But yes, I'm normal. I'm like everybody else.
Yeah. And I think what we've done too much, Marty, is we've turned each other into the enemy, where we've truly become them easily by whatever list we've made. And don't we do that to some extent? I mean, you have at least a list of some of those people who are disagreeing with you about what they're all like.
Yeah.
And some of that is true.
Yeah.
But it's not universally true either, is it?
No, it isn't.
And it doesn't take away some of the other stuff about them either.
Well, I think that is one of the most amazing things about John Lewis, is how he managed to maintain these friendships across the aisle. I mean, I really want to read more about his life and about him and how he managed to do that. Watching the service today, that was a topic. And I mean, to have such strong beliefs and to do all the things that he did, and yet, I mean, George Bush is there. I mean, W. And so I think that, I guess the point you started with, Jim, is we do have to figure it out, because if we don't, I mean, it's just not going to ever get solved. We're all going to just dig into our foxholes and, yeah.
We cannot be the united we stand nation that we profess to be if we allow this rift to continue to be there. We have got to figure out ways to be able to draw ourselves into a common space. Not one that believes completely in everything exactly the same way, but definitely outside of the us against them type of mentality that is currently there.
So where did you leave your conversation, Jim?
I'm going to get to that in a little bit, but let me tell you.
Okay.
So I have another friend of mine on Facebook, and this happened about 3 years ago. And something happened. And no, I should say, she's not quite my friend. She's the person I keep on there so I know what that side is thinking. Okay? Donna is her name. And one day she invoked Martin Luther King and was like, you can't like Martin Luther King. That's my person to like. He's on my side. And part of what I have to remember is that Martin Luther King inspires even my most racist people.
Yeah.
Because they're not racist in the same way that I sometimes am viewing racism. I have to remind myself that that type of racism isn't the worst. It's the space where corporately we are still advantaged by. So how do I have that type of conversation? How do I move it from the attacking her, because there's a lot of what Donna needs to be attacked about, to the, okay, we both believe in some of the things the same way. Martin Luther King speaks to both of us. We're both being drawn towards something.
That's a great intro. I mean, that's you have a commonality there, and that's how you can begin to build conversations that are peaceful and can maybe move something, move along.
At least part of what they're dealing with is what she said about white supremacy is a form of trauma that is stored in our collective bodies. And so we feel that, but we feel it sometimes as the pain that we want to stop. And so I think that's sometimes why when we get into these conversations, they easily go on the defensive and say, no, I'm not even going down that road because it'll hurt too much. And so we have to be aware of that, even as we try to go down those roads, that there is pain involved. There is difficulty. There is trauma that is dredged up. And so not to just try to ride roughshod over that, but to try to help us draw towards something that will make the conversation happen.
Well, I know that Doris and Scott Morris have lived various places in the world, and Doris has a really wonderful way of approaching conflict. And that is to do just what I was just talking about, is that finding that place of commonality, like Martin Luther King. We both agree that Martin Luther King Jr. has wonderful things to guide us, and to use that underlying agreement as a way to begin to look peacefully at a little piece of what the conflict is. And I know that that's the technique that she's used over all issues concerning LGBTQ issues over the years, really successfully. And so, but the key to it is to let go of my ego need to be right, and to control this other person so that they come around to my way of seeing it.
Yeah.
That has to be, I gotta let go of that.
So let's go to an example that the author gave at the end of chapter 6. And that was The Blind Side.
Oh
right?
my.
That movie.
Yeah.
which is a good movie, an interesting movie. But you heard in her description how it is also one that absolutely speaks a wrong relationship in the black-white world here. How do we sit in that space of not just endorsing it was just great because we see this now? Can you watch that movie? Can you discuss that movie in the same way?
Well, I think for me, Jim, that was a step in the right direction. But I've come to realize that that one and The Help, which I also enjoyed, relied on white saviors.
Yes.
You know, there was somebody who had to come in and save the day. That the people of color couldn't have managed without them. And it's like, I had heard that in an interview before we even started reading the book, and I thought, oh my gosh. I watched that through white eyes, you know, and thought, wow, this is a good move. It wasn't even a move. It was just reinforcing that we're it. We're the ones who know how to fix things. And
even as it shows some bad white characters, The Help, for example, shows that the one woman is a good stereotype of what we don't want to be.
yeah,
Right? And so it's not taking a let's go back to approach. It's going beyond that, but does it go far enough? And do we hear the legitimate critiques that our Black brothers and sisters have about a movie like that? And what it doesn't say.
but it almost makes me feel like I need to not watch anything about Black characters unless it's directed and written by Black people. I'm not sure any white person is going to be free of that skew.
Yeah. And that's the problem is, well, just the title of our chapter 6, anti-Blackness, is a tough thing to be able to hear because none of us in America want to think that we are anti-Black. Okay? We've grown enough to be able to know that that's not what we want to be. We just don't know how to be because much of the anti-Blackness that she's talking about is built into a system that we are programmed to not see.
Yeah.
And so we think we're telling a story that lifts the Black man from one stereotype, but we might be putting some other stereotype right on top of it. And that's why it's really important for us to watch movies made by Black directors. There's some amazing Black directors out now, and have been for about 20 years. And we need to look for those and hear the story from that point of view. The problem is that too often the Spike Lees have gotten written off as, well, he just is for the Black community. But that in itself is a view of racism, is a racist space, right? Does he speak part of America? Absolutely. And if we want to understand America, we should watch Spike Lee.
The question is, why are we watching movies?
Yeah.
And honestly, I love the movie about Michael Orr and, Blind Side. I've loved that movie. I've seen it probably a dozen times. I agree. There are these issues about it. But I love this underlying story of here's a kid who was struggling and some people reached out and loved him and helped him. And he became a hero to a lot of kids across the country, and he became a very successful football player. And I love that kind of a story, and I love football. And so it was just kind of neat to see, and so, okay, it does have issues, but gosh, it was just fun too.
But
So
that's
why do you Why do you see movies? Sometimes just to enjoy something like that, and then other times to do a Spike Lee movie or some other movie that are really some incredible serious movies.
Yeah, but that's actually a good way to be able to start into a conversation with a friend that you think might be challenging in this arena, right?
Yeah.
You can go and you can say that was a good movie, but didn't it kind of bug you this?
Yeah.
Didn't it seem too much like she was the savior and it wasn't because of his abilities or whatever it happens to be? And you start asking some of those questions so that they look at it deeper than just the feel good.
Yeah, and I think that the author of the book really exaggerates a bit when it comes to this book and the treatment of this book.
Yeah.
And she generalized.
That there's no doubt about it, because she is trying to show us as starkly as possible some truths.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's because, think about it, our whole life, 50 years since we solved racism in America, we've been telling ourselves we've been seeing without seeing. And so she's very clearly trying to make us see in ways we haven't before, because we've hidden too easily behind.
I was really appreciating her education about affirmative action, because I really thought this misinformation was the way it was. If a person of color applies for a position, they must be hired over a white person. Black people are given preference, and then a specific number of people of color had to be hired to fill a quota. That's what I thought affirmative action meant. I don't know where I got my information that it was so false, but I was grateful that she cleared it up for me, so I know better today.
Sure. But see, that's part of her point, is that many of those kinds of stories are told in the white community so much
Yes.
that become truth, whether they are true or not.
Like habit.
The habits
by the
that we
time-
talked about.
And by the time the truth is really clearer, the programs are gone.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have to be the ones who fight and say that's not true. Let's talk about the real things so that we can get to a good solution. The hard part about, okay, this is not necessarily about white America. This is about conservative thought. What conservative does really easily is black-white things. Okay, and I don't mean that from a racial standpoint. I mean from a very simple, there's a right answer, there's a wrong answer. Okay, and we have to enter into this space where they're seeing a right answer or a wrong answer, and we have to start having the nuanced answer that is easier for liberals to have. They're not going to see it as well, but we have to get into that type of conversation so that we don't just allow them to just write something off like affirmative action, but we get into the deeper question about what's going on around affirmative action. Because too often their internal dialogue with themselves, not just internal here, but internal of the party, is that they just say, this is a wrong thing. And that's what happened with affirmative action, just a wrong thing. And we have to have different, we have to help the more complex and nuanced discussions to have happen, especially in what race relations. We have to get to that space. So how do you get there? Because like my friends, the first thing that happens is they throw up the right answer, right? Mark came right back and said, well, look what happened in black-white relations. So my answer to him was this. First of all, I try to reaffirm you. It's true. You've got some truth in you. But black-white relations in America is also an issue that has never truly been resolved and continue to have broad and deep implications in our country today. In comparison, Jane Fonda's betrayal, however horrible it was, had very limited, broad, or deep implications, but is held up as equal in comparison. So you've got to start saying you can't compare this to this, not the same thing. You've got to start talking about some of their logical steps that are keeping them holding on to something as if it's equal or if it's as much importance as something else, right? And you have to start saying, are there better solutions? For example, with BLM, the question is always the right answer from my friends is always, they're just wrong. Look at how they're rioting. Look at how they're burning down buildings. Look at this picture of the streets of Minneapolis. It's just wrong, right? And you have to bring it to a different question. Maybe they've done wrong things, but what has happened that has helped right things happen? Has the president gone and been in conversation with leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, or has he just said they're wrong and has just attacked them as if they are the enemy? That's a different question. And they have to, and they're not going to like it at first, but you've got to start pushing and saying, we've got to expect something better than our response up to this point. Just writing BLM off as the enemy doesn't begin to solve the issues that are in front of us. And we have to challenge people on that.
Well, and part of the problem is the media. They tend to concentrate on the violence, but they don't show the peaceful protests, and they don't show things like when a lot of the protesters surrounded a police officer who was being beaten and protected him. They don't show when they were standing in front of shops to prevent them from being vandalized.
Yeah.
They only show the violence. And it's not always the Black Lives Matter people. It's often, when they catch them, the white supremacist people who are coming out, causing all this violence to make it look like the president has to put in his stormtroopers.
Yes. So we get to hear that, Wendy, easily, because we sit in a space where we are open to hearing that. How many have some of your friends that are not as willing to hear what Wendy just said?
Yeah.
How do we begin overcoming that?
Wendy, I agree. The media has a lot to do with it. We've got reporting that talks about two different factions of BLM too. Who's their leadership? And granted, I have a lot of conservative friends. I got a lot of libertarian friends too. So there's confusing messages that are coming to all of us right now.
Yes.
Well, and I think we have to get after the media and say, hey, all these other things are happening, show that too. Not just the violence.
Yeah. But it's not just convincing us. It has to be the conversation that not convinces, but that is there. That's a conversation that happens there and gets past all of their triggers.
I think part of the secret is trying to make the conversation be a way to introduce them to things that might make them think. I know that, I mean, this is getting off the subject a wee bit, but we've had this kind of conversation with one of our daughters who is very much pro-life. And the conversation that my husband had with her about this was, her argument is that that God views life as sacred, as you know, as life is important to God. And Joe said, well, in the Old Testament, how many times did he wipe out whole 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 groups of people. And I sat with her one day and I said, I don't believe that I would ever have an abortion, but it's not my place to say that someone else cannot have one. It's a matter of our rights to choose, and not the right necessarily of the unborn child. And it has made her think. And it's actually said to her dad, she said, "You're trying to make me think, aren't you?" And she said, "Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do." And it hasn't really changed her mind about it, but yet I think she has a different viewpoint about it now than she did 5 or 6 years ago.
So,
And that we can do that same thing with other issues. We can just give information that just might make somebody think.
and why is Joe able to do that with your daughter?
Why is he able to? Because she respects him and he respects her.
That's right, because they are in a relationship. There is something beyond just the animosity that often gets engendered in this type of a conversation. That's, I think, the key to what has to happen here. You don't overcome someone's triggers just haphazardly. You overcome it because you're close enough to them that they allow those guards to come down in some way or another. And you as well, right? That we don't easily go to the animosity. We hear the challenge and we choose not to respond to it because we respect the person on the other side. So let me answer your question, Elizabeth. Mark wrote back to me, and his first line said this: "Really interesting." This was his response to my thing about suggesting that the president should be talking to Black Lives Matter people. He said, "Really interesting how information provided by propagandist machinations find its hands into respected individuals who have substantial influence over many others." He goes on to talk about systemic racism, as the liberals like to call it, is a catchphrase that can apply to any ethnic or racial group, such as BLM, using it to promote an agenda that sends out information that is partially fact-based and mostly incomprehensible. All right, and then he goes on, and that's like the first few lines of probably a 20 or 30 line thing. So I thought long and hard, how do I answer Mark? What do I do? I said, first of all, let me begin by saying thank you for your very cogent description of your concern in the matter. I'm not in complete disagreement with you, as you seem to imply, and then I listed where I thought I was in agreement. Not perfect agreement, but at least an agreement. And then I began talking to him. I began showing where I'm at. But this is the important thing. After I pretty directly said, it appears that you are the one who is not starting with himself, but trying to change others around you, including me. Right after I said that, I said this: "Mark, one of the reasons why you are precious to me is that you helped provide a relational space so that I could penetrate my self-constructed barriers to the future that God wanted for me. In doing that, I had to move beyond the stories of why I was holding on to anger or self-righteousness or right answers already delivered, and hear what God wanted of me in that moment. Thank you for that amazing gift. Please hear the love in my heart as I state that it appears from my perspective that it is you who is holding on to anger in this moment, instead of opening yourself to the voice of God around you. You helped me to discover that happiness is an inside job," which is one of his quotes, "and I hope you continue to discover that truth as well." So I tried to take it from the issue to the personal. He has been amazing to me. And I don't want it to be that I'm just attacking him. I want it to be that we are in a conversation to better ourselves and this world. Who can you do that with? Who needs your relationship to help them to step into something better? One thing I'm
My-
certain of is I can't fix all your friends because I can't even fix myself.
My friend Mary, from time to time, something comes up and I try to just, in baby steps, you know, present her with my point of view. And I'm trying to think, there was another friend as well. But I just try to do it in bite-sized chunks, amounts that I can handle at the time. And also try to stay just calm about it, not let it get me really worked up. Because as much as I don't like what I'm hearing, you know, oftentimes from her, it's at the same time we have a friendship, and I'm really working on trying not to let it get to me. She's been bringing up things like periodically now, like COVID-19 isn't that bad, or one day she said, you know, Hillary Clinton and the deep state, no wonder Donald Trump has to do all the things he does with changing everything all the time. Just go like, huh? You know? And so I just try to kind of bring her back to reality in a way of, you know, the way I see things, and probably, you know, a little bit more of a realistic sense of the way things are. And with the COVID-19 thing, I just said, because we both have health issues, and I said, you know, either one of us would be in real trouble if we got COVID-19. It'd you know, be a real problem. And you know, it's like she couldn't really argue with that. So, and she said, well, yeah, you know, I realize it's a serious disease. So it's just like little steps here and there, and not trying to make it one big conversation, because I'll just get emotionally exhausted from it, and we won't come out happy out of that.
Yeah, and I think the key is that you're trying to value the relationship as you continue to work in that relationship. And that's difficult because the conversations around this type of issue can damage relationships. We see that a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
But it is only the relationship that is going to allow us to truly do the right talking around these kinds of issues. Right?
Yeah.
I think maybe that's one of the advantages of having those conversations on Facebook, is that you have time to consider and generate your response. Rather than in face-to-face conversation, the temptation is to just keep going and keep going and keep going, when there needs to be a break, a rest time, a time to think.
Yeah.
Are you trying to imply, Judy, that it might be possible that I wrote some things yesterday that I deleted out of my response to Mark? Are you trying
I think that's very possible. But I'm thinking, you know, all the time that I was teaching, it wasn't until the latter half of that experience that people were advocating that we give kids think time, that in a conversation that was going on, somebody would say, time out, time to think of what's just said. And I know that in some communities and things, they ring a bell when it's something important that's said, and everybody stops and just thinks about that last statement before going on to something else. And
Pause when agitated.
Yeah.
Pause when agitated.
Yeah.
And we're doing a lot of just reactive speak today, aren't we? Leticia, you've been trying to say
Well, they've been talking for years about the stuff that goes across Facebook and Twitter and that kind of things. It's a lot of people feel that they can say whatever they want to because there's an anonymity being in those platforms. And we have to be real mindful of that. I talk about having a lot of far-right conservative friends. Well, my family is made up of both extremes on the spectrum. And I try in all my conversations, friends, family, or whatever. I have a friend that's big on a big supporter of law enforcement. And I posted something that talked about defunding police. And it was in the thread of maybe we should make sure there's more social workers type of law enforcement officers, where the law enforcement is not trying to mitigate medical situations like the young man that got killed here in April or May, Ramirez. You know, from the description, they were far away from their expertise, and they should have had either social workers or paramedics or both there to ease that situation. And that kind of defunding needs to be looked at too, not just demilitarizing them, right? Take some of those responsibilities that they're still not trained for. They might get 6 weeks of it. And it's not enough. But I got lambasted for a week. He still won't talk to me about it.
It's because when things are in a highly charged situation like we currently have, it becomes really easy to act like that other person is the enemy. Attack the enemy. You know, that's what you do. And somehow we have got to come back to some sense of community, whether it is family, whether it is country. We cannot continue any frame of the old saying that said, America, love it or leave it. The more we say that type of thing to each other, in whatever way, it hurts us getting towards something. We have to figure out some way to say, America, I'm staying because I love it. I'm staying with you because I love you. And that's hard to do, isn't it? Because we don't always like each other in the midst of something like this.
Well, I think sometimes you don't realize too. My brother-in-law, I have three wonderful brother-in-laws. Politically, only two of us agree. But I spent several nights, half the night, one night, almost all night, just talking about things that that matter to me. ELL education for students and dreamers, and that I taught a lot of Mexican students and stuff when I was teaching, and we stayed up and talked, and we never got in a horrible argument. We didn't agree, like gun things we didn't agree on, but I thought at the time, well, I went to bed and my husband said, well, you fought all night long? And I said, no, we didn't fight. And I didn't feel like we fought. And anyway, months later, something came up and there was a family situation, and I was feeling much in a bad spot. And my brother-in-law said, oh, I support you. And I knew that your heart was good or whatever. He's a minister. He's a Southern Baptist minister. He said, I knew when we stayed up all night and talked that we were on the same page on some level. And so you never know. You just never know what's going to happen. And, we won't agree on a whole number of things, but, I have a relationship with him now that I never had. And so I think sometimes it's just like my friend who I started talking about at the beginning. Her son killed himself. He was a policeman. You probably might have heard the story about, he shot someone with a gun that he thought was rubber bullets, and it wasn't. And it injured somebody grievously years ago. And so she can't talk about this. And I totally understand that. And she's never going to ever be able to have a conversation about Black Lives Matter. And so sometimes I think you just have to think about where the people are and maybe why they're where they're at, because sometimes there's just things that are just too deep, and but sometimes you're amazed, Yeah. Anyway,
Why did we come up with the term defunding police? That is very offensive to a lot of people.
Yes,
we just promoted we need social workers more. We need other people to help in these situations more, but not such an attack sounding word on police.
I agree.
But to have that conversation, we have to get away from one particular way of saying it or whatever. We have to get into a true conversation, right? You're right, defunding the police, that phrase is a terrible phrase. I understand where it comes from, but it doesn't help the conversation. And we have to think of what are some of the other phrases that are not helping the conversation, both the phrases we use and the phrases that they are using that are setting off our triggers. That's what this whole chapter is about. Okay, so I want to go back to what I told you last week. My friend Ben ended up in Portland as one of the masked police officers, right? He's a border patrol agent. He went in there to be the opposite of the side I would be on. But he's my baby daddy. His kids are my kids, right? His kids, I love them deeply. And so when I look at that and I want to correct him, I remember, but I love Alicia. I love Thor. I don't have to fix Ben. I get to be in relationship with him. That's what we've got to do. But isn't that what we believe here at St. Francis? We choose love. That is our first thing to choose. Even when there's a lot of other stuff that needs to be fixed, our first choice is love. Thank you guys for a good conversation. Sorry we didn't get to fix everything. We got a couple more weeks. Take care.
How are we doing on our schedule, Jim?
Pretty good, actually. We're getting there. Just kind of follow the last schedule I gave you. It's pretty close to that.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I will send out my notes, which include my conversation with Mark and Alan, but I will also send the text of the next 2 chapters.
Okay, and just to be clear, you didn't send out notes last week, right?
I haven't been sending out notes because most of my notes are just quotes that I want to look at. This time I will send that out because it will include those quotes, but I've also kind of put some things in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 type of format, and I also added in my conversation with Alan and Mark.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.